Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Um, Happy to introduce some hot topics to you today and talk about testing strategy, and how we can organize um, our testing activities during a short time frame of sprints. I'm Marius, and I'm hosting this webinar on behalf of the QA Pillars team, which is a community that it's on a mission to empower professionals to reach their full potential. And yeah, the team itself helps professionals to level up their skills, identify any gaps, and improve their knowledge and experience. Let me go quickly to what we have for today prepared. Yep. So we're going to talk about optimizing test planning in short sprints. A bit about myself. So I have around 12 years of experience in software QA, and I'm really happy to be here and share the knowledge and experience. And if there's any questions and any other areas that we need to deep dive, I'm really happy to go into more details. Let's look a bit on our agenda and what we are trying to cover today in today's session. We will focus on prioritize on a key aspects such as what are the main prioritization techniques, and what are the key areas to prioritize and optimize test coverage. Of course, a big part of the planning itself, it's related to risks, which are ever changing and always dynamic. So we need to understand how to handle risk-based testing, and then how to deal with incomplete requirements, and how to continuously improve the overall QA process. Touching a bit on the key areas of critical test scenarios, I think the main points we need to take into account is the fact that we need to define and identify high-risk areas. And one good point is basically using historical data and try to see the past defects, the areas where they produced, and kind of like having them as a good starting point to identify a certain path. And then another key aspect is to prioritize the critical customer flows, which means basically understand the business of the customer, what they're trying to achieve, even if it's like on a product direction or on a small path, like what we are looking to cover in the next increment, and we are trying to deliver on the next sprint, and understand the business area and the product area and the criticality of what's needed to be achieved, and basically focus on that. Of course, always be in touch with the development team and focus on complex area of the code, and try to identify some potential risks that might come and might surface on the testing side related to this. Of course, always consider areas of recent changes. Always need to take into consideration the current scope and previous scope and how it was impacted, and always align with the development priorities. So whether to understand that as a team, we have the same goal and we need to deliver the same things. So always align the priorities and see what's more important also for the dev team. That would really help to understand the overall testing strategy that we need to adopt. Yeah. So some of the techniques that we need to use, basically, it's related to risk analysis, business priority, and usage analytics. I will go into a few details related to each of one, and try to understand together when we use each of them, and how would be a potential workflow and a priority within the workflow itself. So there are several useful techniques to handle from this perspective. The risk analysis itself helps identify high risk areas that could cause significant impact. The business priority itself, it focuses on features that are most important for customers and for revenue. So and it's another significant area. Touching on the third subject, the user statistic, it's basically a way to kind of understand for applications in production how they work, and based on the user patterns and what it's mostly used in the application, that could deliver a sense of interest for the end users. And you can basically have this approach on determining the most important areas where you can prioritize as a QA team and where to focus and to shift your attention to. Yeah. And to identify high risk priority areas, let me go to the next slide. To identify high risk priority areas, we need to look for functionality with high risk, with high usage and critical business value. And it's always important to collaborate with business analysts and understand, and product owners to understand the overall direction. But also it's important to understand the priority areas coming from the requirements and the user stories on different features and their priority within the sprint. And of course, as I mentioned, yeah, we need to also always keep in mind the customer impact and the business value. So using risk analysis to prioritize tests, it's basically we kind of look into a direction of assessing the likelihood and the impact of the risks, while weighting the risk factors by criticality and overall calculate the overall risk scores. How we can achieve this is to basically, like I mentioned in previous slides, we can use a starting point. A starting point can be previous critical areas that we identified, use them as a starting point, and always adapt to what's coming and take into consideration the overall scope of the sprint. Take into consideration the priority set by a product owner and the business analyst, which is always in touch with the customer. Based on previous data of what was considered a high risk area, we can determine the area of high interest, and we can calculate overall a risk score based on that. Of course, it's always important to update the risk assessments periodically, meaning that once the focus shifts onto a certain area, and we always focus on the next sprint or the next increment on different areas, then always take that into consideration and adapt the possible risks and the possible outcome to the new scope of the sprint or the new direction that the team is heading to. A key important factor is to also always have continuous improvement approach while developing test cases. And doing so, you always target to test smarter and to try to identify the test cases that are mostly used, or by different cycles of execution, you can identify certain areas that may produce improvement to the overall test cases. So there might be a situation where some test cases, based on metrics, they are slightly used, or they are slightly producing a real impact, or they are slightly relevant for what was changed in the product itself. So it's always good to adapt the test cases. It's always good to remove redundancy and to see what is the new direction, and always start with the most priority things. So that's why we can focus on the critical functionality. Of course, we need to also make sure that our test suits and the test cases itself, they are always adapted to the change. And that means also we need to take into consideration that we need to avoid duplicating test cases or overlapping tests. We need to make sure that we do not duplicate the test cases and we do not duplicate the effort while the team is executing the test cases themselves. And always it's important to have an open discussion through, for example, daily sessions or other ad hoc meetings that might provide vision and might provide more insights on the dev team itself, and what they are focusing on, so that we can always be aligned. A couple of things related to strategies to optimize testing in sprints. Key important factors for this are to prioritize by risk and by priority. So as I mentioned before, yeah, we can have a set starting point based on previous risk areas and previously identified critical bugs. We can set a priority based on that, and based on the functionality it has been touched by the actual execution of that test case. And we can directly set a priority to certain components or to certain area of the code or certain areas of the application. And that can be set and used as a first priority when starting the new sprint. It's also important to have an early start. That means early start also in the sprint itself. The better and the faster the issues and the critical paths and the risks are identified, then the sooner the team can readapt and change focus or change priority based on that. It might be a situation where a piece of code or a piece of story was maybe incomplete, and it would really help to have a quick vision related to the quality of it, so that it can have like a quick turnaround and reestimate, reassess, and not impact the sprint so much. Since it's at the beginning, then it will greatly help um, to see what's next, and will avoid situations where we are in the final days, we need to show a demo, and everything is not ready, and it may cause a greater impact than discussed and raised sooner. Of course, a big part of optimizing and optimization overall on the testing side, it's related to automation. So it's always good to have a solid and robust automation strategy. It's always good to take into account the redundancy and also the repetitive tests. That's the most important part that we can consider automating, and just rerunning those tests, making sure that the previously designed features and the previous code that was checked in, it's already stable there. It's not producing any kind of like major instabilities. So therefore you can focus on the new functionality. And of course, as I mentioned, reevaluate the priorities in each sprint and adapt, and always optimize test data and environment. It's also important to have this approach, so that we can avoid the so-called pesticide effect. It's always good to adapt the test cases and to enrich the test data and find new ways to kind of validate functionalities and go deeper into the testing strategy, so that proper metrics at the end of the sprint can provide confidence for the increment and overall to the business and to the customer. So key aspects on the importance of early testing. Of course, as I mentioned, it increases the time of retesting. It helps finding defects sooner, and it maximizes the test fix retest cycle, right? And it develops initial testing. The development of initial testing during dev, it's really helpful to do that. To give more example, while dev is still in the implementation phase, then the QA can take action and already have some agile approach, such as development of the test cases based on acceptance criteria, and already starting to develop the testing strategy, so that directly when the functionality is delivered within sprint towards QA, it immediately can be taken into testing, and proper test cases can already be executed. And of course, as I mentioned, test critical functionality as soon as possible. Basically understand in that story and in that implementation, what is the relation to other features that were developed, and the possibility of impact areas, so that regression and other issues that are with high risks can be quickly identified. So a bit of challenges of changing and incomplete requirements. We always have this. We are in the situation of having incomplete or partial acceptance criteria and partial requirements, but this is also a challenge. Of course, always is a challenge, but yeah, I think the important part is that focusing on the detailed test cases, we can already start as an approach with high-level test plans. We can focus on structure and interfaces, and we can basically start testing with what we have, and we can adjust the test cases and the requirements as they evolve. It's critical, again, to maintain close collaboration with the product team to see the evolving priorities, and to understand how they change, so that we can adapt our approach as well. Yeah, and I would like to continue touching on this subject of maintaining maintaining collaboration. This is critical. Open communication is always critical, and it's important. So whenever we deal with requirement changes, being in the same channel, being in the same open communication scenario with the rest of the team will greatly help to adapt. And it's also critical to request high level of details early on. But even if the requirements are not finalized, use what you have to kind of define the high level test cases, and try to be prepared as fast as possible. And it's really important, while analyzing the requirements, to flag any potential missing requirements proactively. So it can be from your previous experience, from your overall experience, while working in similar features, and or having some kind of like a product knowledge on that area, might help you understand that immediately there are some gaps, or there are some potential risk areas, and it's really good to bring them up as soon as possible, to see if this is also a concern for the product development team, and always align the testing strategy based on that, and based on the fact that requirements might be updated, might be refined. It's an important part also is to learn from retrospectives. Retrospectives are a really great area of discussion, and it's really good to kind of zoom out at the end of the sprint and see what went wrong, what went good, and what are the key factors of improving your work, improving the team velocity. And it's really an opportunity to discuss open within the team. Essentially, yeah, you can optimize the process, and you can update your best practices. You can draw some action items for improvement, and you can take them into consideration on the following sprints, so that yeah, further learnings are already there in place, and you can directly see the involvement and the overall growth of the team. So another key aspect is to choose to continuously improve the overall quality of the product through metrics and through lessons learned. As I mentioned previously, overall QA activities are also relevant for tracking what was done, tracking what changes, and always have the capability to adapt and to optimize based on what changes. So it's also good to keep in mind to cover all of the activities, so-called quality metrics, and it's good to track them sprint over sprint so that you can analyze the trends and you can already see the improvement areas, or you can see the areas where quality has decreased, and you can immediately raise this, or you can directly target the testing strategy to those areas. It's always important to document also the lessons learned after each sprint in the sprint retrospectives and try to follow them one by one so that it can also analyze how metrics are evolving based on the improvement areas and the lessons learned. And always try to review the lessons learned when planning. So lessons learned themselves can be tracked sprint over sprint. They can be added as action items, and the team itself should follow to improve them, so that the progress itself on the lessons learned is also consistent. And whenever there's any kind of scenarios of thinking outside the box, or thinking of specific scenarios or specific ideas, it's always good to see how you can apply them and to use them as an opportunity to turn them into different optimization processes. All right, so we reached a section of Q&A. Any questions so far? Okay, we have a question here. Can we build an automation strategy? How can we build an automation strategy to better help in test planning? Okay, so that is really a good question. The automation strategy itself can derive from the strategy of the product, but also in relation to what is actually the activity on the QA side. So let's assume that we already created some test cases, we already run them, we still decide that it's critical to run them to kind of make sure that the build and the product itself is still stable for the previously delivered features. So at that moment, we can identify that the repeating test cases that we have been running sprint over sprint, it's not necessarily a duplicated effort, but it's a repeated effort. And the key part is to try to automate those. Try to automate always the repetitive work so that you can use the gained extra time to explore different ideas of thinking outside of the box, or trying to focus on an area where you can see that it's strategically possible to evolve into critical issues or critical bugs on that side. Okay, another question is, can you provide a real-world example of using score-based testing? Yeah, of course. So score-based testing is basically trying to understand, on a suite of test cases, you have a test plan on different features, and you have a certain number of test cases. You can look at the statistics of, for example, how many passed, how many failed, of a total number of executed test cases. And you can then do this either at a general level, let's say on the entire test plan that covers many features, but you can also be granular. So you can directly filter the results based on different features in different areas. And based on that, you can determine the quality grade of a certain feature. And you can immediately identify that, for example, a certain feature is having more test cases failed and more bugs in a certain area. So therefore, you can kind of make a trend, and you can make an analysis and determine what is the most impacted feature after a cycle of testing. And furthermore, you can also adapt your test strategy based on that. You directly know that the feature that had the most bugs, you can also prioritize it in the next sprint. And even one more step further, you can also see what is the relation of that feature with other features, so that you can have like a chain event of assessing the possibility of regression areas in connected features, let's say. Any more questions? Happy to answer them. Okay, then let's summarize the session for today. I just want to make sure that we have some key takeaways here based on what we discussed. So main important thing is to align early and often with the product team. It's important to continuously improve the processes through metrics and retrospective, and always focus on delivering value, not just features. With this, I would also like to give some links where you can reach us out. So you can join our private group, or you can subscribe to our QA mock interviews, where we can identify any growth areas, improvement areas, and discuss about it. Okay. Thank you for your time. If there are any other questions, if not, was happy to give some insight on this topic, and looking forward to discussing again to another presentation. Have a great day.